You're listening to audio from Cities Church. You can find more resources and learn about our ministry by visiting citieschurch.com.
One of the basic fundamental claims of Christianity is that God is omnipresent. Psalm 139 is the greatest celebration of God's omnipresence in the Bible. God's omnipresence, it's a big word, but basically means the reality that wherever you go, God is there. The living God is present everywhere and every when. And this means that wherever you are, the phrase, God is here and now, is always true. Always. There is no place in all of reality where you can say, God is not here. That's the point of verses 7 to 10. If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, Hades, the place of the dead, you're there. If I get up as early as possible and I travel as far as possible to the other side of the planet, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, even there, your hand will lead me and your right hand will hold me. So no matter how high I go, and no matter how low I go, and no matter how far I go, God is there. Which means God is here. Now. Right now. He's here. This is a basic fundamental claim of Christianity. God is here and now, which means, as one theologian put it, we never speak about God behind his back. That's sobering if you think about some of the things you've said about God and that I've said about God. He heard it. You said it to his face because you're always before his face. We always live in his presence under his watchful eye. C.S. Lewis, Jonathan mentioned, I'm going to try to draw a little bit from Lewis in illuminating Psalm 139 today, said, we may ignore, but we can nowhere evade the presence of God. The world is crowded with him. He walks everywhere incognito. Now, we're not pantheists, we're Christians. We don't believe that the world is God or that God is the world or that he is some kind of gas or liquid that fills up the space in between everything else. We believe that God is totally present everywhere, and yet he is not identical to anything in his creation. He's omnipresent in the world in the way that an author is omnipresent with and in his story. Like everything you see and hear and touch, including me right now as you see and hear me, is sustained moment by moment by his word, by his imagination, by his attention. It's only his attention that keeps any of this going right now. And yet he's not confined or constrained or limited by any of this. He is transcendent, beyond, above, outside of the world, as well as immanent within it. High and lifted up, as well as near and close at hand. This is the basic claims of what Lewis called mere Christianity. And it makes God incomprehensible to us. Like we don't get to wrap our minds around any of that. Our little minds can't contain him. He is unimaginably different from everything that he has made. He's absolute and ultimate. He is the ultimate fact. The absolute rock bottom reality, the thick center of reality who pervades all of reality. As the prophet Isaiah said, He is God and there is no other. He is God and there is none like Him. And this ultimate God has unlimited attention for each one of us individually. God's thoughts about you are so vast that they outnumber the sand of the sea. Look in verse 17 and 18. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake and I'm still with you. Still. You have more thoughts about me still. Which means that if you attempt to contemplate the omnipresent God who has unlimited attention for you, you'll probably say, like the psalmist, such knowledge is too wonderful to me. It's high. I cannot attain it. So, as we begin this morning to think about the omnipresence of God, I want you to keep before your mind these two truths. The first one is that you are here and now. Here. In St. Paul, in this church, on this day, you are here and now. And second, that God, the eternal, omnipresent, personal author of everything, is also here and now. But I want you to notice something else from Psalm 139. God is not just here and now. He is here and now pursuing us. This ever-present God is after us. He's searching us. He's knowing us. He's discerning our thoughts from afar, which is weird because He's not far, He's here. He's acquainting Himself with everything about you. Before you speak, He knows your mind completely and totally. He's never surprised by anything that comes out of your mouth, unlike your spouse. And this again makes God different. It means that this God doesn't just stand there, but He makes demands of us, and not just any demands. He's not a tax collector, asking for a percentage of your time and resources and leaving the rest to you. As your creator, He demands all of you. Like He formed you, this is verse 13, He formed you in your mother's womb. He knit you together, wove your body and your soul into a unified whole called you. He is the maker and you are the made. He is the potter and you are the pot. He is the author and you are His character, and therefore He has all rights and claims to you. As you sit here, the almighty maker of heaven and earth lays claim to you, your ultimate devotion and affection. And this again makes Christianity different from pantheism. Because the popular god of pantheism is basically like a mysterious life force that flows through the whole universe. You want to get in touch with that life force in order for things to go well with you. But a life force makes no demands of you. The life force will never interfere with what you're doing. This pantheistic life force is a tame God. He gives, so like today, when you walk outside and the sun is shining and it's beautiful after a long winter, and if you want to feel like there's something more than just matter in motion, then that pantheistic life force is kind of nice. Like the universe is, I'm in touch with it. But if later tonight you want to do something wrong, something not quite ethical, that life force will say nothing. Just go right ahead. And so you get all the thrills of religion, all the happiness, earthly speaking, and none of the cost. Now, Christianity is also different from another popular notion of God in this respect, because some people want more than a life force. We don't want an impersonal it that's just out there somewhere. We want a personal God, but we don't want to go the whole way with the Bible. We want a personal God, but one who won't interfere. Like, we don't want so much as a father in heaven, we want a grandfather in heaven. Everybody goes, oh yeah, grandfather in heaven. This is Lewis describes grandfather in heaven. A senile benevolence, sorry, Grandpa, who, as they say, like to see young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. But the God of Psalm 139, the God who is here and now, is neither a tame life force nor a senile grandfather in the sky. This God is alive. He is pulling at the other end of the cord. He's perhaps approaching you right now at an infinite speed, like he's coming after you, the hunter, the king, the husband. He's not indulgent or soft. He is the great interferer, insisting that because he made us, he knows what's best for us. Look at verse 5. He hems us in. He boxes us in. He surrounds us. He lays his hand upon us. He pursues and interrupts us. He confronts and challenges us. He is a lion and he's not tame. So here are three basic facts about reality. You are here and now. God, your maker, is here and now. And this God, the living God, is pursuing you. And these three facts yield a fourth. Every moment of every day, you are confronted with a choice, like Pastor Jonathan said in the exhortation. You can either embrace and welcome this reality. You can surrender yourself to the eternal, omnipresent, and pursuing God, or you can vainly try to hide from him, to resist his advances, to reject his offer and his demands. That's the choice. You can put it this way. Psalm 139 is just true. Whether you like it or not, it's just true. This is basic reality, period. And you can either embrace it as good news or you can resist it as bad news. Like, God's omnipresence and pursuit of you can either be life and joy to you, like eatable, drinkable, swimmable gold, or it can be death to you. And you can suffocate yourself by attempting to assert your own independence and autonomy. Those are the options. God's omnipresence is a fact, and it will either be life and light, or it will be oppression and destruction. It will either be heaven, or it will be hell, and how you respond makes all the difference. And what this means is that while it's true that we are always in God's presence, it's equally true that we are perpetually called to come into God's presence, to unveil ourselves to his view, to embrace his searching and knowing and hemming in as good for us. And if we're honest, even for those of us here who are Christians, we are very reluctant about this. We keep our guard up lest God's voice become too unmistakable. Like Lewis at one point mentions the sort of fellow who prays quietly lest God actually hear him, which he, poor man, never intended. And often this reluctance is because we're afraid. Because we know if we open that door too wide, who knows what God might show us about ourselves. Like we're terrified of Psalm 139 because we're terrified of being known. Like you read, you have searched me and known me. You know everything about me, every word, every thought, and it terrifies us. Like you look down into the recess of your heart, into those dark caves where nobody's allowed to go, and you can't even see what's down there. And that's frightening enough. And so if you come into God's presence, and if you open the door to Him, what if He goes down there? Or worse, what if He brings something back up? Something that we've tried very hard to bury. Like we resonate with verse 11. Verse 11 there. Surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be as night. Like, surely darkness will keep me out of God's sight. And then the text comes and blows it up and says, even the darkness is as light to Him. You can't hide. In our shame, in our resistance and rebellion, we want to cover ourselves in darkness and hide from the all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipresent, and pursuing God. And so instead of unveiling, instead of embracing the goodness of God's omnipresence, we try to do things halfway. Here's what we do. Like we want to dabble and splash at the edge of the ocean of religion, but we will refuse to dive in and swim. We tell God, you can live in our house, but it's our house. You can come in. In fact, God, I will go so far as to say you may live here, but you may not look in that closet. That's my closet. That's my closet alone. I'm going to put a sign, keep out. We want to preserve some area of our lives upon which God has no claim, some realm that we can call our own, which is none of His business. And this is what I'm stressing to you right now from Psalm 139. There is no such area. God claims all of it. And He is very merciful. And He will forgive many failures, but He will accept no deliberate compromise. You cannot bargain with Him. He's not claiming this much of your time and that much of our attention. He's not even claiming all of our time and all of our attention. He's claiming us, ourselves, the totality of who and what we are. That's His claim, and He will be satisfied with nothing less. And so we must come into His presence. We must unveil before Him. Now, this is where that truth right there about reality from the Bible is where Lewis has been really helpful to me. And so for the last few minutes, I want to talk about how Lewis has helped me to embrace that as good news and not resist that as bad news. And so you can think about this as advice from Lewis about coming into God's ever-present presence. Or you could think about this as advice from Lewis about how to pray. Because that's what prayer is. Prayer is the meeting of persons. Personal contact between embryonic, incomplete half-persons. That's us. Embryonic, incomplete, still in process, still becoming something, half-persons, and God, the utterly real, concrete, and full person. So here's the advice. Number one, come to God as you are, not as you ought to be. Because often we're reluctant to come to God because we know that what we're bringing with us is out of whack. Like it's out of order. Our desires are out of order. So you ever done this? There's something that you want, and you know that you want it probably in a wrong kind of way. You want it too much or something like that. Like in comparison to other things which ought to be more important, you really want this thing, whatever it is. And so you come to God, but you try to trick Him. We pretend that we want other things more than the thing we really want in hopes that He will be impressed by our wanting the other things and will give us the thing that we really want. This is really comical. I have to think that angels are capable of laughter precisely because of stuff like that. Like, do you see what they're doing? Psalm 139 shows us how foolish it is. You can't fool God. He's searched you and known you. He perceives your thoughts from afar. So come to him honestly, as you are, not as you ought to be. Now, that might mean that you have to come to him in confession for wanting something in the wrong way. And that's fine. Bring your disordered desires to God. Allow his presence to fix them, heal them, moderate them, reorder them. But the main thing is to drop the pretense, to stop pretending that you want something else when what you really want is eating a hole in your heart. That's number one. Come to God as you are, not as you ought to be. Number two, beware of vague guilt. Beware of vague guilt. One of the main hindrances, years of my life, I think, were spent avoiding God because of a sense of vague guilt. There's a vague cloud of guilt that can hang over us, and vague guilt is particularly troublesome because you can't repent of vague sins. You can only repent of real sins, and real sins are always specific sins. So it means if you find yourself in a vague cloud of guilt, you have to begin by asking God to show you the details, like to press through that smoke to see, is there actually a fire under here somewhere? And if you do, if you ask God, show me, I feel the guilt just hovering and hanging on me, and I don't know why. Help me, is there something under there? And if you press through the smoke and you don't discover any real concrete sin, Lewis's advice is not to keep rummaging around until you do find something, or like invent something, invent a sin so that you have a reason to feel bad. That's scruples. But instead, to treat the vague guilt like a buzzing in your ears, a nuisance, an annoyance that you're meant to set aside so that you can continue to unveil before God. So beware of the vague guilt and press through it. Now, on the other hand, this is number three. Confess your sins quickly and specifically, because sometimes our reluctance to unveil is driven by the fact that we are guilty and we know exactly why. Very different circumstance. Guilt involved in both, but totally different. We know what the guilt is about, and we've been trying to avoid God all day long. And these are the moments when God is hemming us in, behind and before, and we're hemming and hawing and dancing and making excuses, and God is looking at us and saying, you know, you're only wasting time. You know you're only wasting time. I'll let you finish. Keep avoiding, keep resisting. I'll let you finish. But you know you're only wasting time. And in those cases, here's the deal. The best solution is the really, really simple and obvious one, which we really, really try hard to avoid. If there's a specific sin in your life, confess it to God clearly and honestly and forthrightly with no euphemisms. This is important. Like, use the biblical words for sins, not the made-up words that we make up in order to get off the hook. Like, I've lied, God. Not, I haven't been quite honest. I've stolen, God. Not, I used that without asking. I've lusted in my heart. I've envied that person. I've coveted her gifts. I'm full of bitterness and hatred toward him. I'm puffed up and arrogant about this success or blessing in my life. I am full of anxiety and fear about the future. In the same way that you can't really confess vague sins, you cannot vaguely confess real sins. I'm going to say that again. In the same way that you can't really confess vague sins, you can't vaguely confess real sins. Number 4. What do you do when you confess? After you confess, you need to ask God to forgive you, not to excuse you. Because often when we ask God to forgive us, what we're really asking him to do is to excuse us. But this is where Lewis is really helpful. He's very shrewd about noticing how we try to get off of things. Forgiveness and excusing are opposites. Think about it. Forgiveness says, You have done a really wicked, evil thing. Nevertheless, I'm not going to hold it against you. That's what forgiveness does. Excusing says, oh, I see you couldn't really help it. You didn't really mean it. You weren't really to blame, so I'm not going to hold it against you. And so to excuse someone is to let someone off the hook because they didn't belong on the hook in the first place. You don't blame someone for something that wasn't their fault to begin with. That's excusing. Forgiveness stares the evil in the face and says, even though it is evil, I forgive you. I'm not going to hold it against you. And so when it comes to God, Lewis says, what we call asking God's forgiveness very often really consists in asking God to accept our excuses. We want Him to remember the extenuating circumstances that led us to do whatever it is we did. And we go away imagining that we've repented and been forgiven when all that has really happened is that we've satisfied ourselves with our excuses. And so, when you seek God's forgiveness, set aside the excuses and the blame shifting, because here's the deal you have to know. If there were extenuating circumstances for why you did whatever it is you did, God is more aware of it than you are. He saw every last bit of it down to the bottom. And if there were mitigating factors, He won't lose them. You don't have to bring them up. He sees them. Instead, what is required of us is to find what's left over after every circumstance and every mitigating factor has been stripped away. After all of the excuses, strip them all away. What's left? What's left is a little bundle of sin, a cancer that's hardened in your heart. And that's the thing that you have to bring to God, because that's what He must and will forgive. Number 5, don't camp at the cesspool. This is one of the hindrances to coming into God's presence, is we want to camp at the cesspool. Some Christians have thought that one of the main marks of godliness in Christian growth is that you have a permanently horrified perception of your own internal corruption. Okay? Like your nostril is continually attentive to the inner stink. And faithfulness to God means you pitch your tent by the dark caves and the slimy bogs of your heart. That's where you have to live. And Christian growth means you learn to like it. And Lewis thinks this is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. But here's really important. Some people would say it's really bad to have this kind of perpetual sense of your own abiding sinfulness because it's not true. You're not so bad. Don't think badly about yourself. Have some healthy self-esteem. Lewis says, no, it's actually true. You really are that bad, right? We really are that corrupt. In fact, you're more corrupt than you know, right? Like, you could just start peeling away, and there is layer upon layer of self-love and sin all the way down. You are way worse than you know. And so Lewis says, that's absolutely true. But don't stare at it. He commended an imaginative glimpse, that's his phrase, an imaginative glimpse of your sinfulness, not a permanent stare. Because the glimpse should be enough to teach you sense, to teach us sense, to humble us so that we don't regard ourselves more highly than we ought. But the longer we stare, the more we run the risk of falling into despair. Or worse, we might even begin to develop a tolerance at our little hovel by the bog, a perverse kind of pride in this shack over the cesspool. And so cultivate the practice of imaginative honesty about our sin. So look at it clearly, acknowledge it, don't hide it, don't make excuses for it, but don't wallow in it either. Know the sin that's in your heart. Feel the ugliness of it, and then remember that Jesus covers all of it, even the stuff you don't see. Especially the stuff you don't see. Lastly, surrender self-examination to God, following right out from this. in our attempt to lay ourselves open to God, to come into his presence and to say, here I am, honestly, God, you need to remember that self-examination is really God examination. This is how the psalmist ends. Look at the end of the psalm there in verse 23. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there be any grievous way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Notice that movement from the beginning to the end of the psalm. It begins with, God, you've searched me and you've known me. And it ends with, search me some more and know me more. In other words, the psalmist has embraced reality, has embraced the presence of God and found it to be life. I don't want to leave here, God. I want you to always know me and be acquainted with me and lead me and guide me and put your hand on me. That's what the psalmist wants. Now, the fact that God is the one who's searching doesn't make you passive, doesn't mean that you're just a bump on a log. You're active because it takes a lot of effort, a certain kind of effort to lay yourself open and say, do your worst. Do your best. We are active in self-examination, but mainly in laying ourselves open to divine inspection. Self-examination is only safe when God's hand is on the reins. Otherwise, it becomes more morbid and false. So this is what this might look like. Okay? Here's what this might practically look like in your life. Coming face to face with reality that God is here and now, and you surrender yourself to God, giving Jesus the keys to every room in your heart. No dark closet held back, no basement corner off limits. The whole house belongs to him, and if he wants to knock down a wing, he can do it. You lay yourself open before him and you say, God, give me just enough self-knowledge today as is good for me. Just give me enough knowledge about myself, self-awareness, that I can bear it and I can use it fruitfully. And there may be deeper sins, God, I know, way down there deep, and I don't yet see them, but trust that the reason you might not see them yet is because God knows you're not ready to face them yet. Like, you have to learn to crawl before you can walk. You send a guy to boot camp before you send him off to war. And so God's withholding self-knowledge from you in order that you can first learn to fight the little baby dragons, because the big one's going to be a bear. So then you surrender yourself. You've asked for your daily dose. Search me and know me, O God. And then believe. And here's the thing. For some of you, this is the greatest act of faith that you do every day. Believing you are able, God, to show me whatever I need to know about myself, to draw my sin into the light, into my attention, where I can confess it and kill it. You're able to do that. I believe that. And now I'm going to forget about myself and do my work. I'm going to go love someone. I want to close with a story that Lewis tells about his wife, Joy, that captures what the omnipresent and pursuing God is really after. And it brings us to the table. Why is God? Why is he doing Psalm 139 right now? Why is he searching you and knowing you and hemming us in and laying his hand upon us? What does he want? What does he really want? Here's the story. Long ago, before we were married, Joy was haunted all one morning as she went about her work with the obscure sense of God, so to speak, at her elbow, demanding her attention. And of course, not being a perfected saint, she had the feeling that it would be a question, as it usually is, of some unrepented sin or some tedious duty. You guys know, get this picture? Right? You're working really hard to avoid him standing at your elbow. You're only wasting time. At last, she gave in. I know how one puts it off. And faced him. But the message was, I want to give you something. And immediately she entered into joy. We work really hard to avoid everything that would do us good. God's standing there saying, I want to give you something. And we're going, he's after me. He's after me. He's after me. Just turn and face him. I have something for you. I've got something for you. And this is the great paradox that we carry into God's presence. He's here and now. He's demanding everything. But he's here and now, and he wants to give you everything. He's for you. He's not against you. He is not safe. He is most definitely good. And he won't settle for half measures because he loves you and he wants to give he wants to give us himself. And he can't give us himself as long as we're full of ourselves. But if we give up ourselves, if we die to ourselves, then he will give us himself, and in giving us himself, he'll give us back ourselves. When we unveil in God's presence, we find we become our true selves. Stable, strong, full of life and joy, and conformed to the image of Christ from one degree of glory to another, and now we're at the table. Because here, God is present to us, especially in the bread and wine, giving himself to us to be received by faith in order to remind us that he is present everywhere. Like he's focusing your attention right here at this table so that when you leave here, you go, and he's there, and he's there, and he's there, and he's everywhere. Because you've learned to see him here by faith, you can see him everywhere by faith. And so, Jesus is here and now. Come to him. Let's pray. Father, as the team comes and the pastors come, we're not speaking about you behind your back. You're here, and you're now, and you're pursuing, and you're giving. So open us. Help us to turn and face you and receive all that you have for us in Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. His body is the true bread. Let us serve you.